Life is an uncertain thing, but there are three things that are guaranteed. That's death, taxes, and a lobotomite defending the bastardization of a franchise by claiming it was never serious. This is more of an unscripted video because I was recording for another Fallout video that I'm making. I am not sure if you've seen that yet. I'm scheduling all of these to upload at different times. But this topic was raised by someone in my DMs, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. You've probably heard me talk about this in the past, but there are a lot of people nowadays that seem to believe that Fallout was never a serious franchise, and this argument gets brought up typically when you're discussing the Fallout show or even Fallout 4 and 76, even Fallout 3 to a degree, but not as much. See, there's this belief that's better described as a misconception that Fallout was never a serious franchise and was always just a constant parody of a lot of different things. To back up this misconception, people usually bring up the think tank in the Fallout New Vegas Old World Blues DLC, Sergeant Dornan screaming at you in Fallout 2, or that one side quest that lets you become a porn star. In fact, Fallout 2 and Old World Blues DLC are the most common examples that people come up with in order to justify this idea. But that's far from what it's usually limited to. A lot of people point to the Kings, one of the gangs in Freeside, for example, as being wacky and unserious. And while to an observer, they might just seem like a bunch of Elvis Presley impersonators, that's not actually the case, but I'm not gonna talk about that just yet. What I am gonna talk about first is the fallacy that this entire argument is. I'm assuming you've seen the Fallout show, or at least seen my review of it, and that you've played Fallout 4, or at least have some knowledge of it. Let's assume that everything I just mentioned about the previous Fallout games is actually factually accurate and proper evidence of a franchise not being serious. Do you think that that excuses this?
You wanna have sex?
You mean use my cock? That make you feel so good? You wanna make my cock explode now?
Or how about this? Or this? Or this? You see, there's a very big difference between a franchise being unserious and the humor that you're putting in being absolute shit. You know, the sort of immersion-breaking slop that absolutely curb stomps whatever mood you were trying to go for a given scene by interrupting it with a sex joke, for example. Or being so constant and incessant that you can't take whatever it is that you're watching seriously. Not seriously in the sense of, oh, this is so dark, but seriously in the sense of it being, you know, something you can consistently watch without being brought out of the experience. For example, when playing Fallout 2, I am willing to bet $10 that your immersion wasn't broken when you came across Sergeant Dornan and he started screaming at you.
Don't have any? You expect me to believe that, maggot? The truth is, you lost an expensive piece of Army issue equipment. That suit is going to come out of your pay, and you will remain in this man's army until you are 510 years old, which is the number of years it will take for you to pay for a Mark II powered combat armor you have lost.
Nor was it broken when you came into Freeside for the first time and came across some people that looked remarkably similar to Elvis Presley. But when you take all of those out of context and then compile them, it might actually give the impression that the games are just a bunch of unserious sequences of events. It would still be obvious to anyone that has actually played the games that they're not actually a bunch of unserious sequences of events, but to someone who doesn't play the games or has maybe just played one but wants to pretend like they know more than what they actually do, such an out-of-context portrayal would actually make sense to them. I think you're starting to see where I'm getting at here, aren't you? But I'll save that for a bit later in the video. Let's start off in chronological order with Fallout 2. Fallout 2 is a game which the developers themselves admitted that they went overboard with all the references and wacky things they included in the game. But having a bunch of wacky aspects to it does not an unserious game make, not necessarily at least. Regardless of this, it is still a very serious game. Virtually all of the themes it explores are serious, and most of the unserious moments are relegated to side events and side activities and Easter eggs. Fallout 2 is still a game that handles a lot of serious topics with a lot of care and detail, and really you can approach whichever situation you want in any way you see fit. The more cautious you are when approaching a situation, the more detail you're likely to notice in those situations. I won't bore you here with all the details, but there's rape, genocide, constant struggle for survival, and a constant reminder of how difficult it is to survive in this world. Prostitution, slavery, despair, gang warfare, gang-affiliated investigations related to that gang warfare, starvation, dying societies, your character having to sell themselves out, if that's the only option you realize you have when trying to approach a set situation, no spoilers, your character being drugged and abused, dying society, starvation, and the implications that all these things I mentioned and then some have. A factor augmented by the fact that when the game ends, you get a bunch of slides telling you the consequences of all the choices you made. And my memory might not be the best, but I don't think the end slide talking about the death of every member of a peaceful society as a result of you destroying the reactor they relied on had a laugh track at the end of it.
The Gecko reactor meltdown had terrible consequences for the region. The resultant radioactivity and heat emanating from the reactor killed every living creature within a 10-kilometer radius and poisoned the area for years to come. Vault City's perceived threat from the peaceful ghouls of Gecko was at an end.
Nor do I remember anyone rolling on the floor laughing when a race war erupted between multiple members of a single society.
Shortly after your last departure, the powder keg of racial tension in Broken Hills exploded. Racist humans fought against mutants, ghouls, and humans who sided with the mutants. The few survivors of the battle destroyed the mine, ensuring no one else could profit by it, and disappeared into the wastes.
Actually, fuck, now that I'm editing this and on the topic of Broken Hills, can you really tell me that this is wacky?
The destruction of the mutants ensured the death of the town. Without their strength and ability to withstand the toxins within the mine, the valuable ore proved unattainable. Those who caused this destruction rejoiced at first, until they realized the foolishness of what they had done. They struggled to keep the community flourishing, but to no avail. The winds and the waste scoured Broken Hills from the map.
I also don't think a minor drugging and abusing your unconscious body is actually the sort of thing you would respond with a big lamau and all bold caps. Big coincidence, I also don't look at Fallout 2, a game that looks like this that you're seeing on screen, and think it reminds me of Disney World, now do I? I don't know, man, maybe I'm crazy. Does this remind you of Disney World? Also, Sergeant Dornan, that very unserious character that screams at you the second he sees you.
Moron!
God damn it, dude, what an unserious character. After all, we know that no drill sergeant in history has ever screamed at recruits out of uniform. Also, if you've noticed the track playing in the background, that's the music of Fallout 2. That's one of the songs I pulled randomly out of it. Call me crazy, but I don't think that's the sort of thing you'd hear in the background of a Disney show episode. See, Fallout 2 is a serious game with a lot of side things, many of which are very difficult to find, aka they're out of the way that might be a lot less serious. Contrary to what you might believe if you get your opinion from Reddit or retards like Norte, the tone you heard and observed in those end slides is actually how most of the game is. It might legitimately seem shocking to you if you're one of the people that believe the old games was a fucking fun house. And in case you might be wondering, yes, that is the tone that is maintained for like, let's say 90% of all the classic Fallout games except Brotherhood of Steel, and it is also the primary tone of New Vegas, though slightly dialed back. And when I say slightly, I really do mean slightly. Sure, you can compile a bunch of funny moments from the games, and that might give you a good watching experience that you might even laugh at, but let's just say that it's only as effective as it is because everything else surrounding it is much darker. Now, let's move on to Fallout New Vegas, because I have two examples here that I want to bring up. The first is the Elvis Presley impersonators that I've been mentioning so far, the Kings. I honestly am fucking baffled at the fact that I have to explain this, but I guess that playing the games before talking about the games is a foreign concept to a lot of people. But hey, I guess some people in the audience might not know, so there's that. The Kings were and are a bunch of uneducated gangsters in what would later become Freeside. Effectively, they were a bunch of tribals. Now, some people have come out and said, look, they're dressed up like Elvis Presley. They're a bunch of Elvis Presley impersonators. That's a joke, right? That's just a reference. You can't take that seriously, especially if this franchise is supposed to be so serious. Now, you might be a little bit surprised by this, but yes, I can take that seriously and believe every word of it. Because if you've done anything more than looking at pictures of them on Google Images, you might have been able to guess that it actually makes perfect sense for a bunch of canonically uneducated tribals wanting to be adored and admired to want to emulate a guy that apparently is loved and admired by everyone else before the war. To them, all they know is that there was this guy that everybody admired and labeled the king. That's Elvis Presley, of course, and because they want to be adored and admired like Elvis Presley, they're obviously, because they're uneducated, just gonna emulate everything they see and know about Elvis Presley because they're a bunch of tribals that want to be adored and admired like Elvis Presley. This isn't even that much of a difficult thing to grasp, but a lot of people are so dead set on this historical revisionism to try to change the narrative to make sure that people think that Fallout was always unserious, that they somehow fail to consider the most obvious explanation that explains why these uneducated tribals that want to be admired are copying a guy that they see was admired. The King's faction in Fallout New Vegas is hardly the most serious faction in the game. In fact, it's one of the less serious ones in the game, but I don't exactly think that the faction that contains a lot of quests involving the depersoning of a good chunk of the population is exactly the sort of thing that you would have in a TikTok video or anything of the sort. No, really, in case you aren't aware, the King's faction is what opens up a quest that effectively allows you to decide whether or not a good chunk of the population is going to be soft cleansed based on perceived collective worth. Because, surprise, surprise, just because a bunch of people talk funny and dress like that thing you definitely recognized and clap when you saw, doesn't mean it makes sense to disregard them as a jokey wink to the audience. The next person I want to bring up is this characterization of PTSD on two legs. People in the audience that have actually played Fallout New Vegas in the past will immediately recognize who this person is. But in case you don't, this is the character whose brains brains were effectively fried after she was raped by the most diseased, deranged degenerate in the entire wasteland. And believe it or not, a majority of the questline doesn't even involve going after the bastard who did it. And if you start off the questline by talking to her instead of any of the comrades she has, you effectively have to deal with, grasp the reality, and prepare for the consequences of some of the most feared soldiers in the entire fucking wasteland being so fucked that a good chunk of them barely function as people anymore. And call me crazy, but grasping the consequences of having to deal with these people and having to go across the fucking city to a clinic just so one of the most feared soldiers in a fucking army can get treatment for the trauma that is described to you in just enough detail, your brain fills in the gaps once you find out who this degenerate rapist is. I don't really think that you can consider any game that even has a single quest like that to be wacky and silly, especially when this is a franchise defined by consequences of your actions and having such an impact on players that Fallout is the sort of game that players restart from the very beginning just because they felt bad at the consequences of one single choice they made. Did you know that? Did you know that in Fallout 1, for example, one single bad end slide made a lot of players feel so bad that they started the game from the very fucking beginning just because the game impacted people so hard that they couldn't handle the consequences of their own actions? You could almost say they can't handle the fallout of their own actions. I wonder if the name of this franchise has some sort of double meaning that a lot of people conveniently forgot or never knew in the fucking first place. My noggins are really fucking jogging, aren't they? And if, after I just said that, you still don't understand why a lot of those alleged purists and elitists get mad at modern iterations of Fallout, then I really have to get you to check into a doctor because holy shit, you're slow. But I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't mention the think tank. The think tank from the Old World Blues DLC is probably the most popular example out of all of them to try to prove that Fallout was never a serious franchise, and it goes to show how surface level a lot of people are. Now let me add a little disclaimer here. I am not the biggest fan of the Old World Blues DLC. In fact, if you asked me to rate all the Fallout New Vegas DLCs, Old World Blues would be very close to the bottom, if not at the bottom. That doesn't mean I don't like it. I do like Old World Blues, but I just don't think it reaches the heights of Lonesome Road, for example. Part of the reason I don't is because of the humor, and congratulations, you just reached exactly where a bunch of franchise tourists are gonna cut off their clips at to prove their points. But let me quickly explain without boring you to tears or becoming a fucking essay video lasting 10 hours. But basically the argument, and I use very heavy quotes when I use that word, but basically the argument is that Fallout is not a serious franchise because of this screenshot that you see right here on screen right now, where one of the scientists is confused as to what certain parts of your body even are. Read it at your own pace. I'm already stretching my luck with the YouTube algorithm on this. On the surface, what they're saying is absolutely ridiculous and probably some sort of joke that a lot of people are not getting. And that latter part is true because these are a bunch of scientists that have effectively had their brains in a floating jar for 200 plus years, who have gone so insane that not only do they run experiments on innocent people, but they don't even remember what a normal human being is supposed to look like. In fact, you find out that the big bad villain of the DLC, who coincidentally has also gone cuckoo fucking bananas, is actually the most sane out of all of them and has only been acting villainous because he wants to contain them, because if they were unleashed on the general wasteland, they would turn it into a fucking dystopian scientific hellscape, which coincidentally is something that you begin to grasp before the dialogue with them is even fucking complete. But hey, who am I to judge? The answer to that question is Enclave Emily. I am Enclave Emily and I like to judge people. You fucking because while I do think that this DLC went way too overboard with the ridiculousness factor, and the first time I saw them I did just want to shoot them in the face on sight just because of how obnoxious they were, relegating this DLC game and franchise to the status of a wacky comedy is like classifying Super Mario Galaxy as a Star Wars movie. It's not entirely retarded, it's just mostly lobotomized. Hey look, a new Bethesda game trailer, you should pre-order that. Now if you made it this far into the video and are still repeating the argument that Fallout was never serious or was mostly a wacky comedy, then despite the fact that you're wrong, I still welcome you to the Fallout franchise. I recommend you play one of the games one of these days. And if you legitimately want to push that narrative, then I'm sorry, you're just a fucking disingenuous liar that is way too invested in this product to consume. Because fact of the matter is, as much as I make fun of Bethesda fans, the fact of the matter is that even Bethesda fans want things to get better, and it serves absolutely fucking nobody to be pushing this historical revisionism that is only gonna lead things to get worse. If you are legitimately a fan of the games, regardless of which iterations of the games that is, you will actually shut the fuck up with this absolute bullshit, because you are helping nobody and you are only guaranteeing that you'll be drowning in feelings of regret brought about by an empty wallet and an unsatisfied dopamine receptor. And as for the fucking tourists prancing dancing around complaining about the supposed elitists while pushing bullshit like this, then I only have one thing to fucking tell you.
So what are you really covering?
You're a nit! Because for all of the shit that classic Fallout fans get for allegedly being a bunch of elitist pricks, I can't imagine anything that's more toxic, disgusting, and absolutely fucking wasteful to everybody's time, and counterproductive than being an absolute jackass that's coming into a conversation they have no place fucking being in, and taking glee at the fact that something people loved was warped into something that nobody likes, other than people who wouldn't have been interested in what it was in the first place. There is a reason that so many franchises, for example Star Wars nowadays, are considered slop that nobody can actually enjoy other than because they're still linked to the nostalgia that people once had for when it was better. Twisted into a Bethesda-style unrecognizable mutant that only appeals to modern consumer stereotype people who will fucking drop it whenever it's no longer trendy to follow it because it was only there to appeal to low common denominators in terms of quality and intelligence. Fallout always was a serious franchise, and even Bethesda's fucking iterations had a lot of things that you were supposed to take seriously. And I'm sorry to tell you, but if you believe anything other than this, then you're just a fucking liar who really shouldn't be here in the first place. Leave an explosion emoji in the comments if you made it this far into the video and want to throw modern Fallout fans into a wood chipper in Minecraft. Thanks for watching. And if you don't click the like button in this video, I'll deep fry your goldfish. See you next time.